Who voted against the bank reform bill because he said it didn't really do what needed to be done. So we have lost a pretty remarkable player. And you ask yourself, how can that happen? Well, the fundamental reality is in Wisconsin, I'm going to sum it up in the night of the last U.S. Senate debate, when Russ Feingold and his millionaire opponent were debating for an hour. The news story in Wisconsin was not the debate. It was that the last auto plant in Wisconsin closed that day, the Kenosha Chrysler engine plant. And so they had this video of a factory closing. Now, it happened that Russ Feingold spent his entire career trying to keep that factory open. But that factory was closing on Barack Obama's watch, on the Democrats' watch. And frankly, I think that it's not just Feingold. You go right over into Illinois, you see Phil Hare, a former union leader, an absolute stalwart defender of working-class people who voted against the president on a number of issues, went down, got beat, because I think that the national narrative was Obama gets elected, he's supposed to stand up for workers and farmers, and he didn't, so we're going to switch. And it did happen.
But the question then becomes, what happens next? I mean, yes. In many ways, and somebody used the great phrase describing Glenn Beck, one of the sort of media motivators for the Tea Party movements, he's the false prophet of profit, and that's absolutely true, I think. There's certainly racists, as I say, wingnuts, whack jobs, and whitey whiteness in this movement, but there are also people who have been vulnerable to the message, Obama's not looking after the regular guy, we'll look after the regular guy. Again, without a media that will say, that's no regular guy. Ron Johnson is not a regular guy.
Talk about who Ron Johnson is.
$100,000 of BP stock.
This is a fascinating thing about Ron Johnson. Ron Johnson had never been involved in politics. He said that he decided to run for the U.S. Senate from watching Fox. And you actually had Dick Morris on saying, wow, Russ Feingold's vulnerable. Somebody ought to run against him. And Ron Johnson, watching the show, said, oh, I'll do it. His entire economic training, as best we can tell, came from reading Ayn Rand. I'm not kidding. He says that in debates. He thinks sunspots cause global warming. I mean, this is a guy who's way out there. And you say, well, why doesn't the media
And his wealth
this?
Comes from?
He married a wealthy woman.
Spent $4 million just in the primary.
No, if you understand, he gave him, somehow, out of this very small packaging company, he gave himself first one $5 million loan, then another $5 million loan. But really, this is the important thing, because it ties together all the stuff we're talking about. He did put $10 million in up front. But Karl Rove and a lot of these other people have wanted to get rid of Russ Feingold for a long time, because he's the face of campaign finance reform. So that outside money came in huge amounts. And here's the most fascinating, kind of the capper of the whole thing. On Tuesday, a day early, the Wall Street Journal wrote a Dance on the Grave editorial with a drawing of Russ Feingold saying, wow, we're finally going to get rid of Russ Feingold. The enthusiasm of that editorial, I encourage people to go back and read it. The enthusiasm of that editorial summed up really what was going on. Johnson spent a lot of his own money, but literally millions, perhaps tens of millions of dollars in corporate money came in to get rid of Russ Feingold.
And it wasn't just Feingold. The editorial talked about the death of campaign finance. The effort to restrict campaign contributions by corporations is dead. They said this is the end of that liberal experiment.
I wanted to go to Vermont for a minute. Patrick Leahy, head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, easily won his race, as well as Peter Welch, the single Congress member who had taken Bernie Sanders' seat. Bernie Sanders is now the independent senator from Vermont. But there is a heated race that has not been decided, and that is the race for governor. We're joined right now by journalist David Goodman, who also happens to be my brother, speaking to us from Vermont. David, what's happening in Vermont right now? Why is this governor's race so significant? Let's see if we can. David, are you there?
Here.
Okay, why don't you go through why this governor's race is so important?
There have been three key issues that have been debated here. One is Democrat Peter Shumlin is calling for single-payer health insurance for Vermont to be kind of a laboratory for this, to implement it in the country. The other is nuclear power. Vermont has one of the oldest nuclear power plants in the country, called Vermont Yankee. Its license expires in 2012, and Shumlin wants to shut it down. It's a very unsafe plant that has had a number of leaks just this year alone. It would be the first state in the country to shut down a nuclear power plant. It's one of the only states that has legislative authority over a nuke. The other was abortion. Republican Brian Doobie is Anti-abortion, Shumlin has campaigned hard for the women's vote and has said that he will fight to keep abortion safe and legal in the state. So those are three hot-button issues. At this point, it looks like the election may be decided in the legislature. Vermont, if a candidate doesn't clear 50%, it goes to the legislature. It is a Democratic-controlled legislature. So if it is Shumlin who is ahead, it will probably not be a problem for him. One of the interesting side notes, Shumlin, the Democratic frontrunner at this point, led the fight to legalize gay marriage. Vermont, of course, the only state to legalize gay marriage by an act of the legislature, not the courts. An interesting political side note is that as Shumlin, the race was so tight, and Bernie Sanders, not a Democrat, an independent, came sweeping in about 10 days ago and began barnstorming around the state with Shumlin, an independent senator leading the Democratic gubernatorial candidate, to try and get him over the finish line. So it was quite an interesting spectacle.
Well, David, thanks for that report from Vermont. The Blue Dogs, half the Blue Dog Democrats went down. Talk about the significance of this.
Well, some of the Blue Dogs actually, the Blue Dogs that got saved, Heath Schuler, Mike McIntyre are somewhat of an interesting picture. So, Mike McIntyre, here's this guy in North Carolina's 7th District. He's about as conservative as you can get. Not only did he vote against health care reform, he has an NRA endorsement, Chamber of Commerce endorsement, but he also thinks it's okay to fire gay people just because they're gay. And he came out in support of the Arizona immigration papers law, right? So this is a guy that really is pretty much a conservative Republican. The ads in his district defeat the Pelosi-McIntyre agenda. Those are the ads run by his opponent, Ilario Pantano. And so you really see what they had to run against. And that's what happened to a lot of the Blue Dogs. It doesn't matter whether they voted against health care reform or for health care reform. They got tarred, with this Obama-Pelosi brush.
Well, and that happened to people who were liberals, people who were moderates, people who are conservatives.
Just one quick thing.
Yeah.
He defeated Ilario Pantano, very significant, the man who became famous for killing 2 Iraqi men, putting 60 bullets in them and hanging a sign around them, and proudly talked about that.
Although not famous enough, his opponent, the Democrat, didn't talk about it.
They didn't use it. No, because he thought that might harm the political race. Look, but one of the things to understand about the losses of the Blue Dogs is a lot of the Blue Dogs who lost were the people who actually believe in the Blue Dog agenda. The ones who won were sort of people who put Blue Dog, a lot of them in places like California, who put Blue Dog on their resume because it looked good. The truth of the matter is, this is the bottom line. The Blue Dog caucus is done. It's over. It's gone. And that's a relatively healthy thing. But what it also tells us is the Democratic Party as a viable force in the South is also pretty much done. We have to really take another look at that electoral map and understand that our politics is going to be very, very different in this country going forward.
And let's just talk about the governor's races, what they mean for redistricting. We have 10 seconds. Who wants to take this on?
It's a bloodbath. Look, the Republicans took at least 9 governorships. Republicans have taken more than 500 legislative seats that they didn't have. They've got the highest number of legislative chambers right now since before World War II. That's going to be a big problem in redistricting. We're
going to leave it there. Thank you very much, John Nichols and Richard Kim of The Nation magazine, Laura Flanders, host of GritTV. Her book is At the Tea Party. And that does it for today's broadcast, The Morning After. I'll be in Boulder, Colorado on Friday night, and San Francisco on Saturday. We have an amazing team of people who made this show happen. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Berkshire, Federico Duz, Aaron Mate, Angela Comet, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Masood, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Laguerra, our engineer. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.